You think you know the story of Lee Harvey Oswald, the lone wolf, the crazed assassin? Forget everything. Because what I just found in these declassified documents, it doesn't just change the story, it shatters it into a million pieces. The official narrative was always a house of cards, and today we blow it down. Let's start with the biggest bombshell. These papers prove, without a doubt, that the CIA and FBI were watching Oswald intensely. They weren't just vaguely aware of him, they were tracking his every move. Why? Because they were terrified of his connections to the Soviet Union, to the KGB. They saw him as a potential threat, a loose cannon. This wasn't some random guy. He was a person of major interest to U.S. intelligence. So the question is, if they were watching him so closely, how did he supposedly pull this off right under their noses? And this is where it gets even weirder. Just as you're thinking, aha, he was a KGB agent, the same documents slam that door shut. The CIA's own internal memos conclude he was not a KGB agent. He wasn't working for them. So who was he working for? Or was he, as one CIA operative famously joked, and this is a direct quote, "If he was a spy, he was one we certainly mishandled." Think about the dark irony in that joke. It's not funny. It's chilling. But the conspiracy doesn't end with the killing of JFK. It continues with the killing of his alleged killer. The documents reveal that after the assassination, the FBI received phone calls, warning calls. People were calling in, telling the Bureau, Oswald's life is in danger. He's going to be silenced. And we all know what happened next. Jack Ruby steps out of the crowd. Those warnings, they were ignored. Or were they? This proves people knew what was coming. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was a planned execution, and someone tried to warn them. This leads us to the most important question of all. If he wasn't a KGB agent, but U.S. intelligence was watching him like a hawk, who was Lee Harvey Oswald really? To understand that, we have to go back, way back, to his childhood, his defection to the USSR, to the man behind the myth.
So who was he, Lee Harvey Oswald? The name is etched in history as a villain. But to understand the conspiracy, we must first understand the man. And his story is a tragic puzzle, missing pieces from the very beginning. Born into poverty without a father, a kid who struggled, who dropped out of school. He was searching for an identity, a place to belong. And he found it, strangely enough, in the U.S. Marine Corps. He learned to shoot. But here's a crucial fact the official reports love to gloss over. His marksmanship scores were mediocre. He was rated a rather poor shot, not a sniper, not an expert. Remember that. Still feeling lost, he did the unimaginable. He defected to the Soviet Union, to Minsk. Can you imagine? A young American in the heart of the USSR during the Cold War? It was there he met Marina and married her. But it wasn't a fairy tale. Their relationship was volatile, complicated. And Oswald himself? He was a deeply troubled man, so troubled that Soviet intelligence agencies, the KGB, actually considered him too unstable, too mentally fragile to even be a useful asset. They thought he had psychological problems. He was so desperate, so alone in a foreign land, that he even attempted to take his own life. Picture this. Autumn 1961, Minsk. Oswald, a young man with a haunted look, stands alone by the window of his workshop. He watches the leaves fall, completely isolated, disconnected from both America and the Soviet utopia he thought he'd find. He's a man at war with his own demons. And this is the man they say single-handedly changed history? But there's another layer, another bizarre connection. While in Minsk, who was one of his Russian language teachers? None other than Nikolai Shushkevich, a man who would decades later become a key political figure in dissolving the very Soviet Union Oswald had tried to join. The irony is staggering. So we have a picture. A fatherless, troubled young man, a poor shot, deemed unstable by both sides of the Cold War, a man who never truly fit in anywhere. This leaves us with the million-dollar question. If he was such a loose cannon, rejected by the KGB, then why, upon his return to America, was he still so interesting to U.S. intelligence? What did they know that we're only just finding out? The answer lies in the shadows, in his alleged connections to Soviet intelligence, and what those files reveal will shock you even more.
So, if he wasn't a formal agent, what was the real nature of his relationship with the KGB? This is where the story gets murky, and the declassified files become absolutely critical. We know the KGB watched him closely from the moment he stepped into the USSR, but here's the twist that changes everything. According to their own internal assessments, they found him too unpredictable, too hysterical, too much of a liability. They actively chose not to recruit him. Think about that. The world's most notorious intelligence service looked at Lee Harvey Oswald and said, "No thanks, he's too unstable." This wasn't a valuable asset. This was a hot potato.
But then, why did he meet with a known KGB officer, Valery Kostakov, at the Soviet embassy in Mexico City just weeks before the assassination? This wasn't a casual chat. Kostakov was a high-level operative from Department 13, the same unit responsible for sabotage and assassinations. Coincidence or a carefully laid trap? Oswald was desperately trying to get back into the USSR. Was he being manipulated, used as a pawn in a much larger game? And here's the kicker. American intelligence knew. They had informants. They were getting reports about these observations, these contacts. They were watching the watchers. So the CIA and FBI knew Oswald was meeting with a KGB assassination expert, and yet he was still able to return to the U.S. and, allegedly, carry out the murder of the president without any interference. Does that make any sense? Unless he was more useful to them as a patsy than as a stop threat.
This brings us to a brilliant quote from expert Vitaly Danilov, who summed it up perfectly. The Soviet Union had no need to aggravate relations with America by recruiting this man. It was a game of danger, not results. The Soviets had nothing to gain and everything to lose. So if it wasn't for results, whose game was it? This meeting in Mexico City is the smoking gun that points not to a Soviet plot, but to a deliberate setup. It's the perfect piece of theater to link Oswald to the KGB after the fact. And it worked perfectly for over 50 years. But the real truth is buried even deeper in the CIA's own vaults, in documents they never wanted us to see. Documents that don't just point fingers at the KGB, but back at our own intelligence agencies. What did they know, and when did they know it? The answers in these newly declassified files are more shocking than any conspiracy theory. For decades, the question has haunted America. What did the CIA and FBI truly know? Thanks to these declassified documents, we're no longer asking questions. We're getting answers, and they are terrifying. Let's connect the dots with cold, hard facts. We've established Oswald was a man nobody wanted to recruit. Yet, these new files reveal something sinister. The CIA had connections to groups that were closely linked to Oswald. This isn't a conspiracy theory anymore. It's in the official paperwork. What kind of connections? The kind that leads directly to the murder weapon. The rifle that killed President Kennedy was purchased through a shady arms trading network, and according to these documents, that network brushed up against the world of intelligence. This means the very tool used in the assassination may have flowed through channels the CIA was aware of or even connected to. This isn't a coincidence. This is a pattern.
And the reaction inside the agency after the assassination proves they were terrified, not of a foreign threat, but of internal exposure. Documents show CIA members were deeply, deeply afraid of leaks, afraid of what might come out. What were they so desperate to hide? This points to one chilling possibility, that Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't just a lone nut. He was the perfect patsy. A man with a known history of defection, public support for Cuba, and contacts with the KGB, however superficial. He was the ideal fall guy, set up to take the blame for a crime engineered by others. Many historians, now looking at this evidence, believe Oswald was a pawn in a grand, deadly game between the KGB and the CIA. A game where his life and his identity were just currency to be spent. He was a man designed to be caught. His entire biography was a blueprint for a cover-up. But wait, it gets even darker. If U.S. intelligence agencies were involved in a plot to frame Oswald, then his murder by Jack Ruby 2 days later wasn't just the action of a distraught nightclub owner. It was a necessary silencing. The closing of a loop, the elimination of the one person who could have exposed the entire operation.
This is the heart of the conspiracy, not a simple Soviet plot, a complex, homegrown deception of unimaginable scale. But how much of this is proven fact, and how much is dark speculation? The truth is, the documents don't give us a neat solution. They open a door to a labyrinth of rumors, alternate theories, and whispers that have persisted for 60 years. And in that labyrinth are some of the most shocking ideas of all. So where does the documented evidence end, and where does speculation begin? The declassified files don't give us a movie-style ending. Instead, they open the door to a hall of mirrors, where every reflection shows a different truth. This is where the rumors and conspiracy theories flourish, and some are more compelling than others. The most persistent theory, and the one most supported by the facts we've seen, is that Oswald was a patsy, a fall guy, set up to take the blame. Think about it. The anonymous phone calls to the FBI warning that his life was in danger after the assassination. Those callers knew something. They knew he was going to be silenced to protect the real story. He was the perfect candidate, a man with a publicly unstable personality, known connections to the USSR, and a history that made him easy to frame. And the surveillance? We now know the intervention by the CIA and KGB in tracking him was far more active than anyone believed. They were both playing with fire, watching a man they considered a loose cannon. It reminds me of that dark joke told by an FBI agent who spent years watching Oswald. He was too wild to be an agent and too lonely to be a toy. That quote sends chills down my spine, because it captures the essence of this tragedy. He didn't fit into any neat box. He was an outsider, used by forces he could never possibly understand. Was he a puppet? Absolutely. But the question that has haunted historians for 60 years is who was holding the strings. The theories are endless. Was it a rogue faction within the CIA? Was it anti-Castro Cubans? Was it the mafia working with intelligence assets? The documents don't say. They only confirm that the official story is full of holes too big to ignore. The truth is, we are left with more questions than answers, and that is the greatest tragedy of all. A president was murdered, a man was killed before he could tell his side,
and the full truth remains locked away, perhaps forever. But this isn't just about history. It's about truth, and the fight to uncover it isn't over. Which brings us to the final, most important question. After all this evidence, all these revelations, what does it all mean? And can we ever truly close this chapter of American history?